You thought you forgot. You didn't. Right now, somewhere deep in the neural pathways of your brain, your 8-year-old self is sitting cross-legged on a carpeted floor, completely absorbed in something that modern you would dismiss as just a cartoon. But here's what's going to mess with your head. That kid knew things, real things, about joy, about wonder, about how to live in the moment without the crushing weight of tomorrow's anxieties. And you traded it all away for what? A mortgage? A LinkedIn profile? The ability to have opinions about cryptocurrency. See, while you've been busy becoming a functional adult, something sinister happened. You didn't just grow up. You performed surgery on your own soul, cutting out the parts that made you feel alive, and convinced yourself it was maturity. But your 8-year-old self? They're still in there, watching, waiting. And they have some things to say about the person you've become. This isn't about nostalgia. This is about psychological archaeology. We're digging up the buried treasure of who you really are. Let's start with what everyone gets wrong. People think nostalgia is just some cute quirk where we miss simpler times. They'll roll their eyes and say, "Oh, you're just romanticizing the past." Wrong. Dead wrong. What's actually happening is far more complex and frankly more disturbing than anyone wants to admit. Your brain doesn't just store memories like files in a cabinet, it weaves them into the very fabric of who you are. Every cartoon you watched, every game you played, every moment of pure, unfiltered joy you experienced between the ages of 6 and 12 became part of your psychological DNA. And here's the kicker, those experiences are still active, still influencing every decision you make, every relationship you form, every dream you chase or abandon. The 8-year-old you wasn't just watching Saturday morning cartoons. They were learning the fundamental rules of good versus evil, friendship, perseverance, and hope. They were absorbing a worldview so pure and uncomplicated that your adult brain can barely comprehend it anymore. But it's still there, buried under layers of cynicism, student loan debt, and the crushing realization that the world is more complicated than you ever imagined. Let's talk about what was actually happening in that developing brain of yours. Between ages 6 and 12, you existed in what psychologists call the latency period. Your mind was like a sponge, but not just any sponge. A magical sponge that absorbed not just information, but emotion, wonder, and possibility. Every Saturday morning ritual wasn't just entertainment. It was emotional programming. The music, the colors, the stories, they were creating neural pathways that would influence your taste, your values, your entire sense of what feels right for the rest of your life. That's why hearing the theme song from your favorite childhood show doesn't just make you remember. It makes you feel something your adult brain struggles to replicate. Your 8-year-old self lived in a world where problems had solutions, where friendship conquered everything, where you could become anything you wanted with enough determination and maybe a magical transformation sequence. These weren't just stories to them. These were blueprints for how life should work. And here's what no one tells you. Your 8-year-old self was right about most of it. The cynicism you've acquired? That's not wisdom. That's damage. The ability to dismiss wonder as unrealistic? That's not growing up. That's giving up. So why does putting on an old cartoon at 3 in the morning feel like a religious experience? Why does the sound of a Game Boy starting up make you want to cry? Why does walking through the toy section at Target feel like stepping into a parallel universe where everything made sense? It's not just memory. It's time travel. When you encounter something from your childhood, your brain doesn't just remember it. It temporarily becomes that version of you again. For a brief, precious moment, you're not worried about your credit score or whether you're wasting your potential. You're 8 years old, and the most important thing in the world is whether your favorite character is going to save the day. Modern entertainment tries so hard to be clever, to subvert expectations, to be realistic and gritty. But your 8-year-old self didn't want clever, they wanted sincere. They wanted heroes who were actually heroic, friendships that were actually loyal, adventures that were actually fun. And guess what? Deep down, you still want that too. That's why modern remakes often feel hollow. They're missing the secret ingredient, the absolute belief that good things are possible. The writers are adults who've forgotten how to feel wonder without irony, hope without cynicism, joy without guilt. But those old shows, those old games, those old movies, they were made by people who still remembered, or at least they were made for people who did. And when you encounter them now, it's like finding a message in a bottle from your former self, reminding you of who you used to be before the world convinced you to be smaller. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Here's the part that will make you pause this video and stare at the ceiling for a while. You can't go back. You know that, right? All this nostalgic content you consume, all these attempts to recapture that feeling, they're beautiful, but they're also a little tragic, because you're essentially trying to have a relationship with a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore. You're mourning someone who's both dead and still alive inside you. And here's the really messed up part. The past you're nostalgic for? It wasn't even that great. You've edited out the loneliness, the confusion, the powerlessness of being a child. You've created a highlight reel and convinced yourself it was the whole movie. Your 8-year-old self knew secrets, yes, but they also knew terror. They knew what it felt like to have no control over anything important in their life. They knew the crushing disappointment when adults let them down, when friends moved away, when favorite shows got canceled. So when you dive into nostalgia, you're not just seeking joy. You're seeking a very specific kind of pain. The pain of remembering what it felt like to believe in things. The pain of contrast between who you were and who you've become. The pain of recognizing that somewhere along the way you stopped expecting magic and started expecting disappointment. It's addiction, really. The hit of remembering feels good, but it also reminds you of everything you've lost. So you need more. More content from your childhood. More reminders of who you used to be. More proof that once upon a time you were capable of pure happiness. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we honor that 8-year-old self without getting trapped in the past? First, stop dismissing their wisdom. Your inner child isn't naive. They're honest. When something brings them joy, it's not because they don't understand the world. It's because they remember what the world could be like if we didn't actively work to make it worse. That cartoon that made you cry? The lesson it taught about friendship wasn't childish. It was profound. That video game that made you feel like a hero? The confidence it gave you wasn't fake. It was real, and you could use more of it now. Your 8-year-old self knew how to play without keeping score. They knew how to be curious without needing to monetize it. They knew how to love things without worrying whether other people would judge them for it. The secret isn't to become 8 years old again. It's to integrate that 8-year-old's knowledge into your adult capabilities. To remember that growing up doesn't have to mean growing cold. That wisdom doesn't require cynicism. That you can acknowledge the world's complexity while still believing in its potential for beauty. Your inner child isn't trying to drag you backward. They're trying to remind you that you had the right idea all along. Before you learned to second-guess every impulse toward joy. Before you convinced yourself that caring too much about anything was embarrassing. Before you traded wonder for the illusion of sophistication. Here's the real secret your 8-year-old self knew. Happiness isn't something you achieve. It's something you choose. Every single day, in 1,000 tiny moments, you get to decide whether you're going to let that inner child have a voice or keep them locked away because you're afraid of what other people might think. Every time you scroll past something that would have made you light up as a kid, you're making a choice. Every time you dismiss your own excitement as silly, you're making a choice. Every time you consume nostalgic content but refuse to let it change how you live your life, you're making a choice. Your 8-year-old self is still in there, waiting for you to remember that the point of growing up wasn't to become someone else. It was to become more yourself, more capable of protecting the things that matter, more able to create the world that inner child always believed was possible. So the next time you find yourself watching something from your childhood, don't just consume it, listen to it. What is that 8-year-old trying to tell you about the person you've become? What would they think of your life? What would they want you to change? Because here's the final twist. They're not gone. They never left. They're just waiting for you to stop being embarrassed by how much you love them. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to let them back out to play.